What's up, everybody? Welcome to the latest episode of Training Tuesdays. This is episode 7 in our 8-week series. And today's episode is brought to us by our friends at Poland Spring, who have been supporters of the Dempsey Challenge for quite a while now. And we're excited to have them as a part of today's broadcast. And to go along with that, we're going to be talking about optimal hydration. And today's guest is the expert of all experts when it comes to nutrition and hydration. She's been with us for the last 2 weeks talking about protein and carbohydrates and fueling. And let's round that out today with our hydration tips and techniques as well. So welcome to the show, Judy Donnelly. Welcome.
Hey, everybody.
I mentioned that you've been with us the last couple of weeks. So for people who may not have seen the show over the last 2 weeks, we really did talk about fueling and getting ready and preparing for workouts, during workouts. And today we want to really wrap that up and talk about what that means for preloading before challenge weekend. We also want to then throw in and talk about hydration as well. Not only once again on event day, but also in the lead up to the event weekend as well, because a lot of what you do and how successful you are during your event will be dependent on fueling and hydration before. So why don't you maybe give us a quick 1-2 minute recap of what we talked about last week and the week before we dive into today's topics.
Sure. So 2 weeks ago, I'll jump back to 2 weeks ago. Our focus was on carbohydrates and the importance of carbohydrates as your body's preferred source of fuel. So we'll be talking a little bit about those as well today, just in terms of, what you want to be doing for the couple of days before the event and the morning of, or depending on the timing of your run or ride, what to eat right before you go. And then last week, we talked all about protein. We actually had Zach Castingay from Hannaford with us, and he made a couple of recipes using plant-based proteins and had a bit of a discussion about, why it's important to have protein to maintain your muscle mass and provide some recovery nutrients after exercise.
Yeah, they were both great topics, and we can refer back to those. You can go back and watch those if you did miss them. But really, the emphasis was on really fueling your body to be able to continue the workouts that we've set, to be able to continue to recover from those workouts and get ready for the next day. And as we move into the final 2 weeks, we really want to start talking about planning your fueling and hydration strategies throughout the weekend and throughout your event, because times have changed. We're not able to come together. We're not able to provide those amazing rest stops that are fully stocked with as much food and drink as you could imagine. So now some people are on their own. So maybe we can talk about some strategies and some plans that people need to think about to maintain and make sure that they're maintaining their fueling and hydration levels throughout their chosen event on challenge weekend.
Yeah, so I think the most important word that you used there was plan. When we go out on our regular training rides, typically we're just filling up our water bottles and maybe throwing a snack in our pockets. And that gets us through. But as the mileage increases, we need to become a little bit more planful. And for folks out there that are perhaps doing a longer ride, over 50 miles, you need to be thinking about, okay, well, where am I going to refill my water bottles and what am I going to eat for food, because I'm not going to need more fuel. And so you need to be thinking about what your route is, for one thing. Are you going to go by a convenience store where you can restock? Or maybe your route's a little bit more rural, which is awesome, less traffic, right? But where are you going to refuel? Are you going to have a friend or a family member maybe meet you somewhere along the way with some snacks? So then it becomes, okay, well, what time do you want me to meet you there? So there is a lot of planning that goes into the refueling piece for those longer rides.
Yeah, I think that's really great to emphasize. And yeah, you have to decide, are you going to be self-sufficient? Do you know that there's gas stations or convenience stores along the way? So yeah, really thinking about mapping out and planning your route now especially is important. And practice. Make sure that you practice ahead of time. So practice not only potentially the route you're going to take, but also what you will be eating and drinking along the way. We've emphasized that right from the beginning. But now, as we're starting to get in those final weekends and those final workouts, it is really important that we practice. We don't want to try anything new on event day. So that's great advice. Now, we have talked about how to fuel during. So let's go back and talk about that, because I know that there is, actually, let's talk about loading, because I know that we've talked about glycogen stores in muscles and loading our muscles ahead of time for training, but it's even more important on event day. So maybe we can talk about some of that glycogen, glucose, carbohydrate loading before the weekend's event.
Yeah, so, just to refresh people's memories a little bit, glycogen is really how we store carbohydrates in the muscle tissue. So, as you're exercising, and particularly at higher intensities, your muscles will really start to use exclusively carbohydrate for a fuel resource to keep them working. So, the longer your event, the more you want to preload carbohydrates. So we're not just talking about the morning of or the meal right before you go out and do your chosen event. We're talking about the day before, and maybe even 2 days before if you're doing 100 miles. It becomes more and more important to include carbohydrates of good quality in all of your meals and snacks on the day before your ride, so that you can ensure that you've got a good base of glycogen stored away before you ever get started. And then just to take it into your event, that's going to give you probably 60 to 90 minutes of good coverage with carbohydrates. So then you need to be thinking about, okay, what am I putting into my pockets, and what am I going to refuel with along the way?
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And one thing that from my experience is really just concentrating on eating often as well. It's not necessarily about eating a big meal or a sugary meal or a meal that's really high in carbohydrates, because obviously that causes insulin release and it has the opposite effect. But I think that thinking about eating early and often in the days leading up, and then also early and often throughout your activity. You mentioned 60 to 90 minutes. We don't want to wait until we get 90 minutes when we're completely depleted and then we're throwing in anything and everything that we can get our hands on. It's really thinking about, the first 15 to 30 minutes even, you can get started, small amounts, and eating and drinking, and we'll get to that in a moment, every 15 minutes or so will help you maintain those energy levels throughout your entire activity.
Right. And so a couple of weeks ago during our Training Tuesday session, we made some little power balls, and there's recipes available for those. Those would be great. They're small little nuggets. You can make them whatever size you want. And then when you're thinking about your ride, you want to think about the accessibility, because maybe you don't want to stop every 15 minutes. It's like, okay, well, which pocket am I going to put those little balls in? I'm going to want to hold on to my handlebars with my left hand, perhaps, and reach into that pocket with my right hand. So when you're getting on your bike, just be cognizant of that and put your food in the right pockets. And if it's something that's pre-wrapped, like a little energy bar of some kind, maybe you're just taking one bite every 15 or 20 minutes. But rip the package open before you get on your bike, so that way you're not kind of fiddling with it while you're riding.
Yep, great advice. And we have talked quite a bit about the ride. Now, I also think that it's important that we should acknowledge that many people will be running and or both, running and riding on the weekend off. So let's talk a little bit about how people can fuel before. So same thing, glycogen loading, glucose loading, carb loading before their run, and then what they should consider, immediately before the breakfast, or maybe the breakfast the morning of, and then what they should do during their running events as well.
Sure. So, with the running events, they're not going to take as long. So I think your focus is really on eating a good dinner the night before and a good breakfast the morning of. Both good quality carbohydrates, whole grains, whole fruits, vegetables are all good choices. But there's a couple other things that you'd probably want to consider. Number one, like greasy, higher fat foods might not agree very well. Sometimes people can have a few problems with their bowels if they do foods that are too greasy, or their stomachs might not feel well. So those are things to really limit. Keep it pretty lean. Include some protein and some carbohydrates. The protein just sort of helps you to stay full for a little bit of longer period of time. And then the other advice that I would give, and as a dietitian, I'm always preaching all the benefits of lots and lots of fruits and vegetables. But right before you get out on a run, probably don't want to have too much in the way of what I would call roughage, which would be a lot of raw fruits and vegetables. That can be a little bit too much fiber and again create a little bit of GI discomfort for some people. But again, it always comes back to, we're 2 weeks out right now. So starting to do some practicing with what you do best with before you run or before you ride. I mean, this is the time to start playing around with that and experiment with different foods.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, depending on the time of day you're going to do your activity, you obviously need to leave yourself enough time to be able to digest that as well. So if you are planning on going early in the morning, it may mean an early wake up to be able to eat ahead of time and give yourself enough time to digest completely before you start running as well. So do you have any recommendations on kind of how long before you should kind of finish your last meal before you start even the cycling event or the running event?
Yeah, sure. A little bit of it depends on the individual. And I think it also depends on the type of event that you're doing. With riding, sometimes people can eat, pretty close to their ride and do perfectly fine. But with running, there's a lot more up and down and jostling of the GI tract, so you might need to leave a little bit more time. So I would say if you're with your run, give yourself 60 to 90 minutes really after a small meal. I would call it a small meal or a maxi snack. 60 to 90 minutes beforehand. And with a ride, I would say 30 to 60 minutes, again, depending on the person. If you plan to go really early, when we're on site and doing the Dempsey Challenge in person, it's always a little bit tricky because that ride and run, they start pretty early in the morning. So what I will often do is I'll set my clock a little bit early, like 2 hours early. We'll talk about hydration in a minute, but drink 16 ounces of water, eat a banana with some peanut butter, and I'll go back to sleep for a little while, and that'll be digesting and, good fuel for when the race activity starts.
Yeah, that's great advice. So is that your is that your go-to, the banana and the peanut butter? Is that kind of what your standard morning of go-to is?
Yeah, I usually will have that, and I'll throw maybe the peanut butter might actually be on a slice of toast. But I might have that a little bit later. I'll do the banana with peanut butter, and then when I actually get up for real, I'll have a piece of toast, maybe with a little bit of butter, not too much fat, and put some jam on there. So 2 other good sources of carbohydrate, but broken up into 2 little breakfasts.
Yeah, that's really good. I think it's similar. So I usually aim for about 2 hours before either 1 or 2 slices of gluten-free bread, a good healthy dose of peanut butter, sliced banana, a little bit of honey over there. And if I know it's going to be a hot day later, I'll sprinkle some sea salt on there as well, just to kind of get a little bit extra. And I like that taste profile as well. But and then in that 2 hours leading up, I also think about and concentrate on hydration as well. So continuing that process. So it might be even sips of some sports drink with carbohydrates in it, or it might even be a banana or a bar every 15 to 30 minutes leading up to the start. So it's not too much, so it's going to sit heavy. but it just keeps that consistent flow of fuel going in. So maybe let's transition to a little bit about hydration, knowing that you can also preload hydration. You can also think about how can we get more in our system over the days leading up, not just waiting to the morning of or as soon as you get started. By then it potentially is too late. So maybe let's talk a little bit about hydration as well now.
Yeah, so preloading your carbohydrates, we want you to preload your hydration as well. And really with hydration, I think every day is a hydration day. The most important thing to do is really get your body accustomed to being well hydrated all the time. And that takes practice. I think, drinking 16 ounces of water when you get up in the morning is a good habit, a good way to get yourself started. And then making sure that you're sipping on water throughout the day. I would say water is your best choice. It's not the only choice. There might be dairy products that come in, juices, but water is really going to be your best choice throughout the day. So you get yourself accustomed to it so that it becomes a more natural habit on your race day or event day.
Yep, I agree. I think one thing that's been a real game changer for me, Judy, is I have this little mantra in my head: water before coffee. So I'll actually drink a glass or two before I brew my coffee in the morning, and it has actually made such a difference because you're starting that process off right out of bed. You're not continuing to dehydrate yourself with coffee and then trying to catch up later in the day. It's not an exact science. None of this stuff is exact. There is guidelines, there's recommendations, and I just shared a document in the chat that people can refer to around how much and how often they should be hydrating. But I know there's ways that you can personally check that. So why don't we talk about a little bit about that, how people can check their hydration levels throughout the day simply without having to do a full sweat rate test or going through that whole process. So maybe some advice on how to check and maintain those levels.
Yeah, sure. It's a bit of a nuisance, really. But what you want to be doing is you want to be urinating very frequently throughout the day. So really a good, quick and easy assessment is to pay attention to how often you urinate. It should be frequently throughout the day, like every 2 hours approximately. It should be a very good volume, and it should be a light, pale colored urine. If you're waking up in the morning or even throughout the day, if you find that when you urinate, it's a dark color and maybe a strong aroma to it, it's a clear indication that you're pretty dehydrated. So you want to up the water intake. The only time that I think that the color of your urine might be a little bit of a misguided is if you take B vitamins. B vitamins can change your urine color into a yellowish color. So you might have the volume and be well hydrated, but it might be a little bit more yellow because of B vitamins.
Yeah, great advice. It's a simple way to check and just kind of stay on top of it. I also think about sometimes every time I go to the bathroom to pee, I will then go and grab a glass of water. So it's this like ingrained kind of habit that you're starting to get these rituals around your hydration, because sometimes it's easy to forget whether you're at work or working from home, working away on the computer, and it's 4 hours later and you haven't had a glass of water. So thinking about some of those rituals that may help you throughout the day. Now, let's talk about during an event or even just training. Let's talk about some strategies around hydration through workouts and also on event weekend as well. How can people maintain that and potentially what impact it has if they aren't able to maintain those hydration levels?
Sure. Well, let's talk about the impact of dehydration. So, why is it so important to be well hydrated? Well, if you're not well hydrated, the volume of your blood decreases. So let's think about the importance of the bloodstream. It's delivering nutrients, carbohydrates, and oxygen to your working muscles. So if you're dehydrated and your blood volume decreases, your heart has to work a little bit harder. So your heart rate will go up more quickly, and you're just not going to get the same delivery of the substrates that your muscles need to keep doing what you're asking them to do. And the other really important fact to keep in mind is that being well hydrated helps you to maintain your body temperature in the right range, you know, the old 98.6. As you become dehydrated, and honestly, it does not take significant levels of dehydration to start impacting your body temperature. And so again, as your body temperature increases, it can lead to different types of heat-related illness, which we all want to be safe out there, and we want to avoid those problems.
Yeah, and it's interesting because at this time of year, I recall from previous Dempsey challenges where it's cooler in the morning, so you're potentially wearing more clothes when you get started, which can cause you to start to overheat. It's cooler outside, so there's not that trigger that, oh my goodness, I need to be drinking more. So it's actually a trap that you can get into, even in this fall weather and these cooler conditions, that you're not actually drinking enough, because when it's sunny outside, everyone knows I need to keep drinking, and it's kind of this automatic trigger. But as it cools down, you also have to think about maintaining those levels as well. And I think you have given some good advice previously about setting a timer or knowing that every 15 to 20 minutes you need to drink, because same thing, it could be an hour and you realize that you haven't had a sip of water in that time. So maybe some tactics around kind of early and often and consistent hydration as well.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, I think one of the things people don't realize is that we recommend that you take in between 6 and 8 ounces of water every 15 to 20 minutes during high levels of activity. That's quite a lot of fluid. So if you think about what you've got for beverages attached to your bike, for one, you might have 2 24-ounce bottles. If you're doing a longer ride and all you have is one rack for your water bottle, a cage, you know, you might go into the bike shop and ask them to set you up with a second bottle. And then what you can figure out is like, okay, well, if I'm going to get 6 to 8 ounces every 20 minutes, then how many bottles should I go through in an hour? And that's going to then influence where you need to design your rest stops so that you can refill your bottle. What some people do is they'll have 2 bottles on their bike, but they'll also have a Camelback. That could be a helpful way to decrease the number of stops.
Yeah. And Lisa actually threw a great question here. So she mentioned that she drinks a large amount of water, 80 ounces a day. How do I know how much to drink along the way while in the ride? Lisa, an easy way for that I like to use is a standard size water bottle. So 24 ounce bottle. I will try and go through 1 bottle of water. So a 24 ounce bottle of water, and then a 24 ounce bottle of an electrolyte product. Whatever your preference is. I like to use Nuun because there's not additional calories in there. So you're really getting clean ingredients and clean electrolytes. And I'll go through 1 of those each per hour. So 2 bottles, 48 ounces an hour. I sweat a lot, so I know that works for me. Sometimes you don't feel like it, but that will help. And as Judy mentioned, it will help maintain your level of performance, keeping your heart rate down, keeping your body temperature down. Sometimes you might not feel like it, but you still need to concentrate on early and often. And I think, once again, practice what works for you. Find ways and find levels that work for you. What works for me may not work for you, but it's a good start and it's a good guideline to follow to get going from. Judy, tell us about electrolytes. Tell us about how they can also have that positive impact on maintaining hydration levels as well.
Yeah, so in particular, we want to focus on sodium. Sodium is something that we'll lose quite a bit of through the sweat response, so it's important to replace that. You can replace it through some salty foods. That is always very helpful, but then you can also get some through your sports beverages. It has a couple of benefits. Number one, you know, the sports beverages don't have enough sodium to really replace the losses that you're experiencing from the sweat response. But the sodium that they put in a Gatorade type product helps you to absorb the water a little bit more quickly. So that's really one of the bigger benefits of drinking a sports beverage. You get some of the sodium, but also you get a little bit of carbohydrate. It's not huge amounts, but it is enough, and it's a simple form of carbohydrate so that it's a pretty quick source of energy.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great advice. I love the science around that and how it does help the hydration process. The other thing to note about the carbohydrate-rich beverage choices is whilst that's a great way to supplement your carbohydrate needs, you also need to make sure that water is included as well. So the last thing that you really want to do is wash down a gel or a bar or a carbohydrate-rich product with more carbohydrates, because then the levels and the saturation of carbohydrates makes it difficult for your body to actually digest. So one point that I want to emphasize is if you are taking gels or bars or other carbs, make sure you're taking water with those to wash them down, not just your carbohydrate-rich Gatorade type beverage as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. We usually recommend 6 to 8 ounces of water along with a goo or a gel or something like that. And then once, maybe the next half hour or whatever, you can be focusing a little bit more on water. And the other point that I wanted to make, Travis, is that there is a whole line of different sports beverage products. And what you really want is a product that's going to give you about 14 grams of carbohydrate per 8 ounces. So 14 grams, 15 grams of carbohydrate per 8 ounces. A G2 or a G0, they're defeating the purpose because you're not getting any carbohydrates or getting lower carbohydrates. And the G2 actually has artificial sugars, which you really don't want those in your system during your ride. And then there are some more concentrated sort of recovery beverages that would be inappropriate to be consuming during your ride as well. So just the regular Gatorade, Powerade, something that's going to give you about 14 grams per 8 ounces.
Yep, and there's definitely products out there with natural ingredients that you can source. There's specifically made sports options that are powdered you can mix up. Sometimes with the Gatorade products, people are trying to juggle a whole bunch of different single-use bottles. So yeah, find something that works for you. Practice. Personally, I use Nuun products, the Nuun Electrolyte Sport product, and also the Endurance for anything over 90 minutes, which is getting that carbohydrates in as well. So find something that works for you. I think we've covered it. I wonder if there's any other thoughts or questions from the audience or anything that we have missed, Judy, that we can wrap up and round out with. I know that it's new to people who are potentially doing 50 miles for the first time. It's another layer of complexity to add. So I would encourage anyone, if you do have questions, you can reach out to us on the Strava Club. You can send us an email or a question or a comment, and we'll be more than happy to answer and give you guidance along the way.
So you've been in charge of asking all the questions all these weeks, Travis. I've got a question for you. What is your go-to food the night before an event?
Great question. You've put me on the spot here. I don't know if I like this situation where I'm getting thrown questions. I've tried a lot of things over a lot of years, and I think that I was down the track of salads, like you mentioned, and I found that was not the best for me because of those GI issues. I've tried eating whole pizzas. I've thrown in a couple of beers there to get some extra carbs. I've tried everything and anything. And for me now, I think my go-to is a pasta, is either a gluten-free pasta or something like that with a plain, simple tomato sauce. So you can make it yourself, just crush up some tomatoes. You can find maybe an organic kind of jar or something like that. I always look at sodium levels, so you don't want it to be too high in sodium. I'll always look at ingredients. You don't want to have anything that you can't read or pronounce in there. So really just getting as close to the natural product as you possibly can. I like to throw a little bit of cheese on there for flavor, and maybe a piece of crusty bread, something like that, with some good butter, a small amount of good butter. And then, if you get nervous or you're a little bit, or you're wondering about anticipation, I like one beer or a glass of wine just to maybe take the nerves down a little bit. Just be aware of obviously the dehydration of those, but yeah, just keep it simple, keep it as close as you can to the natural ingredients. And yeah, that's my go-to. What about you?
I am a potato girl. So usually night before any kind of an event, it'll either be sweet potato or just a regular baked potato, have some kind of maybe chicken, a little bit of shrimp, and some vegetables. Usually I'll do cooked vegetables just because too much of the raw vegetables doesn't seem to agree with me all that well. But yeah, everybody in the family knows that if it's the night before an event, there's going to be potatoes on the menu.
Yeah, love it. My wife is she's a salmon and sweet potatoes. That's her like go-to. It's funny how we get into these rituals as well, and I think that's one of the fun things about these types of weekends and races and events is you get to develop these rituals around your eating and your things you do. And you wake up early and go back to sleep. I can't sleep, so I know I'm always up early. So it's fun. It's fun to kind of work through some of those nerves and develop your own habits around this stuff. So the other thing, actually, one thing I do want to talk about is we will have some folks who will be riding indoors. So we have the Zwift experience, which is a bonus addition to the weekend of Challenge Weekend now. I know that has its own unique circumstances around hydration in particular. Traditionally, when we're outside, we have the cooling effect of the breeze on our skin. But when you're inside, even if you have a fan, your body temperature is raised. You're starting to sweat a lot more. So I think even some of the numbers we threw out there probably increase when you are exercising inside and moving inside. So maybe you can add some color to that as well.
Yeah, that's a really interesting comment. I have not, I've never been an indoor exerciser and haven't worked with a lot of people who just focus on indoor work. But I appreciate what you're saying about your body temperature, probably going up a little bit more quickly than if you were outside and have the cooling effect of the wind. So I guess all I would say, have a good source of water. You're at home, so it's get up and drink. Geez, I don't know that I have much to add. I bet you do, though.
Yeah, I think, well, if anyone has experienced it, even running on a treadmill, riding on an indoor trainer, you'll know that you just get so hot so quickly. So I always like to add, I always like to have more than enough bottles to get me through, because if you are in one of those virtual experiences, the last thing you want to do is kind of get off your bike and, the group goes up the road and you miss the peloton effectively on your bike. So have more than enough. Have your drinks lined up, have them ready to go. Have a towel on hand because the sweat will start to drip. Have a towel over your bike because you don't want the sweat to drop on your bike and kind of impact or affect your beautiful machine. And then have a fan. Get a fan right in front of you. You can practice with the levels of how much you want it blowing on you, but you just want to mimic that cooling on your skin as well. Wear as little clothes as possible. So you don't want to have a full jersey on. Maybe it's a tank top or a singlet or shirtless if you prefer, just to keep your temperature down. So yeah, it's an interesting, once again, practice. If you haven't done it yet, get on there. We have our group rides on Zwift every Wednesday night at 6 p.m. So you can join us there and practice. But yeah, let's think about that as well. That's something to consider.
Yeah, that's cool. You got to ask and answer.
Yeah, there you go. Ask your own questions and answer your own questions. It's the best way.
I exercise even in the dead of winter. I'm outside.
Yeah. I've been hardy a couple of years and done that, but I'm losing my hardiness, I think. And having grown up in Australia, I'm not used to winter yet. Even 11 years later, I'm not quite used to it. So, Judy, this has been amazing as always. I love how knowledgeable you are. I love the actionable insights that you provide. Is there anything else you want to mention? We are queued up for our final week next week, where we'll get the whole crew together. We'll get the whole team together and ask and answer every question you may have. But in the meantime, is there anything else you want to share with the audience before we go today?
Sure. One final piece of advice, and I know there are a lot of groups out there that, even though this is a virtual event, there are small groups of people getting together to do a ride and then maybe have a little bit of a gathering afterwards. And beer oftentimes seems to be part of that experience. So all I would say, since we've been talking a lot about hydration, is get off the bike. Even if you've consumed a lot of water, take the time to drink 16 to 32 ounces of additional water before you have the beer, because it's just a good practice to get well hydrated. Rehydrate before you start to imbibe.
Yeah. Well said. Thanks, Mum. That's perfect. No, great advice. It is, because I remember sitting in the park some Sunday afternoons after the 100-mile ride on Challenge weekend, and you have a beer, and then all of a sudden you start to feel dehydrated because you've lost a lot throughout the day. So yeah, make sure. I just try 1 for 1. If you have one beer, have a glass of water as well. So this has been amazing as always. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to episode 8, the final episode next week, and we'll bring the rest of the crew together.
Great. Thanks, Travis.
Pleasure. All the best. Thanks, Judy. Thanks, Judy. Once again, amazing advice, amazing actionable insights around hydration, around nutrition and fueling, both before and during events. If you have any further questions or comments, please head to the Strava Club. We're active in there. We can answer any of those questions, and please feel free to make a comment. And a final note, we have cracked over 106,000 participants in the Strava Challenge, which is incredible and amazing. And we're also expecting around 25,000 people to join us on Zwift, on Challenge weekend. And that's on top of all of you who are out there doing your thing, wherever you are in the world. So we're excited to welcome many, many new folk to the Challenge and Dempsey Center communities. And we appreciate you all for being here. I look forward to bringing you more Training Tuesdays with the entire group of experts next week. Until then, all the best.